What do you think is realistically the best and worst case scenario for Iran in, say, a year's time?
I mean, the best case scenario, and I think this is unlikely.
Realistic
Yeah, I mean, I
scenarios.
think I wouldn't rule it out as impossible, is that there would be a better regime in place, a regime that, if not fully democratic, is more legitimate. There's obviously considerable dissatisfaction and unrest within Iran at the regime. They do not have popular support. They are not really, they lack legitimacy. And so if that emerged, I think that would be very, very welcome. And if there was the opportunity to do that, I think it would be irresponsible not to try to cultivate it. I do think that that is, unlikely, unfortunately, partly because the regime has not lost its capacity for domestic repression. Even if it cannot fire missiles abroad, it can definitely kill protesters at home. And there's no real way of achieving regime change from air power alone. If we set that aside, I think that the worst case scenario is sort of fragmentation, and the sort of least worst bad scenario is probably that the war ends and the regime it has its capacity significantly diminished and is sort of tending toward its internal economic, crisis, and that the region can sort of get back to, if not normal, a greater level of cooperation and try to turn the page.
But that baseline, which is what you seem to be trending towards, that is also a regime that, from the perspective of the Iranian people, the 93 million, is going to feel very much like the regime it has been living under.
Yeah, and they may, I think that regime will continue to be very vulnerable because, it will not have really the economic capacity to provide basic services. It may not be able to provide energy and electricity, to households and firms, simultaneously, for instance. And so you could end up with that breaking down, of its own accord. But I think that was possible before the war started. I think there was that's one of the reasons the war was a mistake, is because actually just sticking with the status quo of keeping pressure up through sanctions, using the time that was bought from the strikes last June, holding out the prospect of diplomacy if they were willing to engage, but just basically continuing on with no great degree of urgency was perfectly viable. There was no reason to say that the choice is either a comprehensive deal that they were unable to accept or war. That was completely a false choice.